Well, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Happy Father's Day to all of the fathers that are here, and happy anniversary to all of you today. When Major Park asked me if I would come today and be your guest for your 38th anniversary, the thing that immediately came to my mind was that June 16th has some significance for me. On June 16th, 1980, I started my first full-time job, which was working in the Overseas Development Office at Territorial Headquarters. On June 16th, 1984, I was commissioned as a Salvation Army officer as part of the Servants of God session of cadets. 40 years ago today. Yes, I was very, very young. As I look back over those 40 years, there are things that I can remember and celebrate, and things that, as I remember them, make me feel very sad. Giving birth to my 4 children brought me great joy. Losing my mother before I turned 30 years old was a very dark time for me. Marrying my husband also brought me great joy. My son becoming quite sick in his adult years has been a very difficult time. He's doing very well now, though, thanks be to God. There are events in our lives that may be both happy and sad. 17 months ago, our grandson was born. A week later, it was confirmed that he had Down syndrome. Perhaps in your life, you have memories like this. Some that are very exciting and that make you smile, some that are devastating and bring tears to your eyes. The one thing I can say, regardless of whether my experiences were good or bad, happy or sad, was that God was with me through it all. Amen. Psalm 136, that Major Park read for us a few moments ago, is a song of praise to God, a history lesson to future generations, and a reminder to us that God's love endures forever. This would have been the way one generation would pass on stories to the next generation, through songs and poems and repeating one line for emphasis. Even if you don't remember anything else in the reading, you will remember, let's say it together, Kuseguntoronto한인교회, something like that. I've been practicing, but not very well. Now, there are a few things we see in this song. It starts right back at the beginning. It starts totally with praise. Give thanks to the Lord. Give thanks to the God of gods. Give thanks to the Lord of lords. But then it moves into history, starting with the creation of the world. To him who alone does great wonders, who by his understanding made the heavens, who spread out the earth upon the waters, who made the great lights, the sun to govern the day, the moon and stars to govern the night. So the first thing the writer does is establish who God is. All-powerful, creator of heaven and earth, God of gods and Lord of lords. It's critical that when we tell someone about all that God has done, that we start with who he is, and that we give him the glory for everything. The next part is them recounting the events surrounding their exodus from Egypt. They give him glory because he struck down the firstborn of Egypt, because he brought Israel out from among the Egyptians with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Now I want to pause here because I think this is where we need to spend a few moments. Unless you knew the story, you would think from reading this psalm that this was a glorious time and that the children of Israel were untouched in this part of the story. In between every statement were the words, his love endures forever. But if we go back to the actual story found in the book of Exodus, starting with Exodus 5, Moses and Aaron have gone to Pharaoh for the first time to ask him to let the people go. And what was Pharaoh's response? Starting in verse 6. That same day, Pharaoh gave this order to the slave drivers and overseers in charge of the people. You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw, but require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce the quota. They are lazy. That is why they are crying out. Let us go and sacrifice to our God. Make them work harder. Make the work harder for the people, so that they keep working and pay no attention to lies. Psalm 136 doesn't mention that part. Psalm 136 doesn't mention the plagues that impacted not only the Egyptians, but also the Hebrews. They also had frogs and flies and locusts and all of the other nasty things. And they experienced the horrible night when the firstborn of every family was struck down, except for those who had put the blood on their doorposts. It is very possible that there were also Hebrew children who died. Not every Hebrew would necessarily have believed that God could do what Moses was saying he could do. But in recounting the story and giving God the praise after the fact, they left that part out. The next part of the psalm recounts the Hebrews fleeing Egypt and wandering through the wilderness. And between every line we see, his love endures forever. Again, we know from the original story that this must have been a terrifying time, not knowing if they would be killed by the Egyptian soldiers, not knowing if they would survive going through the Red Sea, wandering in the desert for 40 years. This was a journey that should have taken a few weeks at most. And we know that they grumbled and moaned and groaned and complained and rebelled. But as they look back at the story, they give God the praise and they leave that part out. In recounting every part of their history, they remember the events, but they don't remember the pain. They remember first and foremost that God was with them and that he loved them enough to deliver them and provide for them. And the whole point of this psalm is to remind us that if God did it for the children of Israel in the past, if he was able to do all those things with his mighty hand and outstretched arm, he can do the same for us today and tomorrow. When we share our story, it's not just to tell a terrifying story. It's to give God the glory and to remind whomever we are speaking to that God is able to do more than we can ask or imagine. Amen? Amen. When someone shares their testimony, it's to point people toward God and to bring hope. So today, on the 38th anniversary of the Salvation Army Korean Community Church, what are the things we remember? Major Park reminded me that this is the third physical church you have been, that has been home to you, and that he and Major U are your 5th Corps officers. I know of Corps that have had that many Corps officers in the last 5 years, so you are very, very fortunate. I'm sure that especially over the last couple of years, you have memories that are sad, perhaps painful, and I want to acknowledge those feelings today. Much like the children of Israel, you have been wandering in the desert, waiting to get into the promised land. Jeff Mannion, in his book called The Land Between, talks about the children of Israel wandering through the desert and what it is like for us. He describes it like this. He says, the land between equals the land between Egypt and Canaan, going from one to another. In our lives, it's going from one place to another, between promises, or before you see God's plan and promise, getting there. Some people call it the desert. The land between is a place of uncertainty. You know where you've come from, And sometimes it can be coming out of a bad thing into a better thing, like the children of Israel coming from oppression to freedom. But sometimes it can be going from a good thing to a worse thing, like waiting for test results or tracking down a missing child. Whichever way the situation goes, the land between can be uncertain and scary. It can be frustrating and unsettled and anything but peaceful. You have been in the land between for the past 2 years, a place of uncertainty, knowing where you have come from, and for many of you, grieving the loss of that, but not knowing what you were going to. Not the physical address, we've known that for a long time, but the circumstances. Being in the land between can be good or bad. The children of Israel found both. There were times that they celebrated, but there were many times when they grumbled or fought amongst each other. Times when they rebelled and turned their backs on God. There were times that they felt God's punishment and times that they felt God's provision. It is often said that it's often said that being in the land between can either make you better or it can make you bitter. It was necessary for the children of Israel to wander in the desert for 40 years. God got them out of Egypt, and now he had to get Egypt out of them. Many of them had lived their whole life in Egypt with its pagan customs and multiple gods. Their wandering was their own doing when they rebelled against God, and he decided that no one in that generation would see the promised land. Thankfully, he hasn't acted harshly against us. As you look back over the past 38 years, and I'd be interested, who has been here the whole time? Who has been here since the beginning of the Korean church? David, I'm sure you have been. Anyone else? No? No? Okay, well, as you look back over your time in this church, this past 2 years is just a small part of that. It's not your whole history. Psalm 136 does not recount the entire story of the children of Israel, just a very small part of it. And your story is not over. I'm sure that as you look back, you can tell stories of people being saved, of marriages and births and lives well lived, of celebrations and sad times that pulled your congregation together. These are the things that we need to focus on today. It's my hope and prayer when you look back on the past 38 years that what you will remember is that God was with you through everything and that his love endures forever. Amen. It is my hope and prayer that as you sit here today, reflecting on all that God has done in your life and in the life of this church, that it will not cause sadness and tears, but confidence that the God who has stood by you through past events will continue to stand by you through every day in the future. Amen. It's my hope that whatever you might go through in the future, you will look back and remember that the God who has brought you thus far still has a plan for you. Amen. We regularly refer to verses in Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11, that says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." What you might not realize, though, was that the prophet Jeremiah shared these words from God when the people were living in Babylon amongst their enemies, unable to worship the one true God. And God told them to make the best of the life they were now living, and then follows it up with that famous verse, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." God knows the plans he has for you. He has plans to give you hope and a future, not to harm you or cause you pain, but to bring about his plan through you to the Korean community in North York. He has a plan for the unsaved people of this community, and his plan involves you.
Amen.
As you reflect on where you've been, remember that you haven't been there alone. As you reflect on where you're going, remember that you don't go alone. God has and always will be with you. And he has a plan to give you hope and a future. God bless you.
Amen.